Tonight, my daughter will choose her future father, Victoria Hayes said with a calm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And just like that, the entire ballroom leaned forward, crystal chandeliers glowing above rows of polished marble, cameras quietly rolling, 5 men in tailored suits shifting with confidence, each worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime, each ready to be chosen, each believing they already had been. Because this wasn't just a family decision, it was a performance, a statement, a transaction dressed as love, and near the back of the room, unnoticed by nearly everyone, Ethan Cole pushed a mop slowly across the floor, his movements steady, quiet, deliberate, the soft swish of water barely audible beneath the low hum of wealth and expectation. He didn't look up. Not when one of the men laughed too loudly. Not when another checked his watch like time itself worked for him. Not even when Victoria's voice echoed again. Sharper now? Lily. Sweetheart, go ahead. Because Ethan had learned a long time ago that some rooms were not built for men like him. And yet, from across the polished floor, a small pair of eyes had already found him. Lily Hayes stood frozen for a moment, her small hands clutching the hem of her dress, her gaze drifting past the polished shoes, past the confident smiles, past the rehearsed charm, landing quietly on the man no one had introduced, no one had invited, no one had even considered, and something in the room shifted, subtle, almost invisible, like the pause before a storm. One of the men stepped forward, kneeling slightly, offering a bright, practiced grin. Hey there, kiddo. I've got a place in Aspen. You like snow? Another chimed in. Or we could go to Disney whenever you want. Private jet, no lines. Their voices overlapped, polished, eager, controlled. But Lily didn't respond. She didn't smile. She didn't even nod. Instead, she took a small step forward, then another, her shoes making the softest sound against the marble, each step pulling a thread of tension tighter across the room. Victoria's smile stiffened, just slightly, just enough. Lily? She prompted again, this time with a hint of insistence, because this was supposed to be simple, predictable, clean, but children, the honest ones, rarely followed scripts, and as Lily walked, passing one man, then another, their smiles faltering just a fraction, confusion flickering where certainty once stood, Ethan finally felt it, that quiet shift in the air, like someone had turned toward him without making a sound. He paused, just for a second, the mop still in his hands, before slowly lifting his eyes. And in that moment, the distance between them disappeared, not measured in feet or marble tiles, but in something far quieter, far deeper, something the others in the room could not see. And then, without hesitation, without permission, Lily stopped right in front of him, reached out her small hand, and gently took his. The room did not erupt. It did not explode. It simply stopped. Conversations cut mid-breath, smiles froze in place. And even the cameras seemed unsure whether to keep rolling. Because a little girl had just done something no one in that room had predicted. Ethan stood still, his hand large and rough beneath hers, not pulling away, not stepping forward, just present, steady, like he had always been. And Lily held on tighter, as if she had already made a decision long before anyone asked her to speak. Victoria's heels clicked sharply against the marble as she approached, each step measured, controlled. But there was a tension now, a crack beneath the surface. Lily, she said, her voice calm but firm. This is not part of the choices. A few of the men let out quiet chuckles, relieved, thinking the moment would pass, that order would return. One of them adjusted his cufflinks and muttered, kids do funny things. But Lily did not laugh. She did not look away. Instead she turned. Slightly, her small figure standing between the most powerful people in the room and the quietest man in it. I choose him, she said, her voice soft, but it carried, not loud, not forced, just clear, and that clarity made the silence heavier. Victoria exhaled slowly, forcing a composed smile. Sweetheart, you do not understand. These men can give you everything. She gestured lightly, as if wealth itself was standing behind her. They can give you a future. Lily blinked once, her grip tightening. I do not need everything, she replied, and for a moment, even the air seemed to hesitate. Ethan lowered his gaze slightly, not out of shame, but out of respect, as if he knew this was not his moment to speak, only to stand. One of the men stepped forward again, his tone sharper now. "This is inappropriate," he said under his breath, glancing at Victoria. "You cannot let this continue," another added. "There are investors watching." Their voices low, controlled, but edged with discomfort, because something was slipping out of their control, something they could not buy back with confidence or charm. Victoria's eyes flickered between them and her daughter, calculation and emotion colliding in quiet conflict. "Lily." She tried again, softer this time. "Look at me." But Lily did not move. She only looked up at Ethan, as if the answer she needed had already been found in the way he stood, in the way he had not once tried to take the moment from her. And then she spoke again. 3 simple truths that no one in that room could argue with. "They talked about themselves," she said, her voice steady. "They tried to impress me." A pause, small, but enough to let the weight settle. He did not. And just like that, something invisible shifted. The laughter disappeared completely, the confidence cracked, and for the first time that night, the most powerful people in the room had nothing to say. The silence did not break. It deepened, like the room itself was learning something it had never needed to understand before. Victoria's posture remained perfect, her chin slightly raised, her expression composed. But her eyes had changed, no longer scanning for approval or control, now searching for something she could not immediately name. "Ethan," she said finally, her voice measured, turning toward him as if acknowledging his existence for the first time. "Step forward." A few of the men shifted uncomfortably. One scoffed quietly, another crossed his arms, but no one interrupted, because even they could feel it. The moment had moved beyond them. Ethan hesitated, not out of fear, but out of awareness, the kind that comes from a life spent understanding rooms without needing to dominate them. He gently released the mop, letting it rest against the wall, and took a single step forward, then another, his shoes soft against the marble, his shoulders relaxed, his presence calm. Unforced, he did not look at the men, he did not look at the cameras, he only glanced briefly at Lily, as if to confirm that this was still her choice, and she nodded, small but certain. Victoria studied him. Now, not as a background detail, but as a man, her voice quieter, sharper in a different way. "How long have you worked here?" she asked. Ethan answered simply. "Almost 2 years." No embellishment, no attempt to elevate himself, just truth. One of the men let out a short laugh, unable to hold it in. 2 years with a mop," he muttered, but it fell flat. No one joined him this time, because something about Ethan's stillness made the comment feel smaller than intended. Victoria took a slow breath, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in judgment, but in focus. "And before that?" she asked, a pause, just long enough to suggest there was more beneath the surface. Ethan's gaze did not shift. "I worked," he said, then added, "different places." His answer simple, almost too simple, but it carried no defensiveness, only quiet boundaries. Victoria tilted her head slightly, as if recalibrating everything she thought she understood about the man in front of her. The room waited, not for spectacle, but for meaning. Lily stepped a little closer to Ethan, her voice softer now, but steady. "He always says good morning," she said, not to her mother, not to the room, but as if stating a fact that mattered more than any resume. Even when no one says it back, that landed differently, not like a child's observation, but like a mirror held up to everyone present. One of the men looked away. Another adjusted his stance, their confidence thinning. Victoria's expression shifted again. Something quieter, something less certain. She glanced briefly at the 5 men she had carefully chosen, then back at Ethan, and for the first time that night, she did not see wealth, or status, or power. She saw something else, something harder to define, something that could not be presented or performed, and the room, once filled with voices trying to be heard, now held its breath for a man who had never tried to speak at all. Victoria did not speak right away, and that hesitation was new, unfamiliar, almost unsettling in a room that had always moved at her command. Her fingers lightly pressed together as she studied Ethan not as a background figure, but as a variable she had not accounted for. "You understand," she said slowly, her voice quieter now, less performative. "This is not a symbolic choice." The words hung in the air, heavy with expectation. "My daughter is not choosing a story. She is choosing a future. One of the men nodded in agreement, stepping forward slightly, eager to reclaim the moment. Exactly, he added, his tone smooth but firm. This is about stability, education, opportunity. He gestured subtly toward Ethan without looking directly at him. Not sentiment. Another man followed. We are talking about real life here. But their voices no longer filled the room the way they had before. Because something had shifted, something quiet but undeniable. Ethan stood still, his posture unchanged, his hands relaxed at his sides, not defensive, not eager, just present. And when he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, carrying without force. She already has a future, he said, not to challenge, not to impress, just to state. The room stilled again. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in focus. And what does that look like? She asked, her tone measured, testing. Ethan glanced down at Lily for a brief moment. Then back up, safe, he answered. A single word. Simple, unadorned, but it landed heavier than any promise that had been made that night. One of the men let out a quiet breath, almost a scoff, but it faded before it could take shape, because even he could hear the difference. Victoria tilted her head slightly, as if trying to dissect the answer. Safe is not enough. She replied, her voice softer now, less certain. Ethan did not argue. He did not. Step closer, he simply added. It is where everything else starts, and that was it. No long explanation, no list of achievements. Just a quiet truth placed carefully into the space between them. Lily squeezed his hand again, her voice small but unwavering. He does not make things complicated, she said. He just shows up. The words echoed differently, not as a child's preference, but as a quiet indictment of everything that had been presented before. Victoria's gaze shifted again, briefly, toward the five men, their polished confidence now slightly fractured, then back to Ethan, and for the first time, she saw not what he lacked, but what he carried without needing to display it. Something steady, something grounded, something that did not need a stage. The cameras were still recording, the lights still shining, but the performance had dissolved, leaving only something real in its place. And in that quiet, undeniable space, the question was no longer who looked the part, but who understood it without needing to say a word. No one moved to end the moment. And that was the strangest part, because in rooms like this, decisions were usually made quickly, cleanly, without hesitation, but now even time seemed to slow, stretching thin between what was expected and what was real. Victoria drew in a quiet breath, her voice returning, but softer, less certain. Ethan, she said again, not as a command this time, but as a question she had not yet formed. Do you have a family? It was a simple question, but it shifted the weight of the room again. Ethan paused for just a second, not to think of an answer, but to choose how much of it to give. I have a daughter, he said, his tone even, steady. Lily's eyes widened slightly at that, her grip tightening just a little, as if something invisible had connected between them. Victoria watched closely, something flickering behind her composure. Where is she? She asked, her voice quieter now, almost careful. Ethan's gaze lowered briefly, not out of discomfort, but respect. At home, he replied, then added, she is 8, and that detail landed gently but firmly. The same age, the same small world, the same need for someone to show up every day. One of the men shifted again, clearing his throat, trying to pull the focus back. This is not relevant, he said, but his voice lacked the confidence it once carried, because the room no longer belonged to him. Victoria did not look at him. She was still watching Ethan, but something had changed in her expression. The distance she held so easily before was no longer as sharp. And you think that makes you qualified? She asked, not harshly, but honestly, as if she was asking herself the same question. Ethan shook his head slightly, not defensive, not offended, just clear. No, he said, and that answer surprised more than a few people. A pause followed, quiet but heavy, before he continued. But it means I understand what she needs. And there it was again, not a performance, not a promise. Just a quiet truth placed carefully into the space. Lily looked up at him, her voice soft, almost like she was thinking out loud. Do you read? To her. Ethan's expression softened just slightly, the smallest shift, but real. Every night. he answered, and that detail, so simple, so ordinary, echoed louder than any mention of private schools or vacation homes. Lily nodded slowly, as if confirming something she already believed. He would not forget, she said, and that was not directed at anyone in particular, but everyone felt it. Victoria's posture shifted just enough to be noticed, her shoulders easing, her certainty no longer absolute. She glanced once more at the 5 men, their polished confidence now quiet, then back at Ethan, and for the first time, the question was no longer whether he belonged in the room, but whether the room had ever truly understood what mattered in the first place. The room did not recover. It adjusted, slowly, reluctantly, like a truth settling into a place that had never made space for it before. Victoria's eyes lingered on Ethan a moment longer before she finally looked away, turning slightly as if to regain control of something that had quietly slipped beyond her reach. "This is not a game," she said, her voice steady again, but softer, less certain than before. "This decision affects everything." One of the men stepped forward quickly, sensing an opening, his tone confident, eager to restore order. "Exactly. Victoria, this is about long-term stability, networks, access." He gestured subtly toward himself and the others. "We are prepared for that," another added. "We can provide structure, security, the right environment." Their words were polished, practiced, but something in them now felt rehearsed, like lines spoken too many times without meaning. Lily did not turn. She did not release Ethan's hand. Instead, she looked up at her mother, her voice quiet but unwavering. "You said I could choose," and that sentence, simple and direct, landed heavier than any argument. Victoria paused, the weight of her own words returning to her, the cameras still recording, the room still watching. But this was no longer about appearances. This was about truth, and truth does not bend easily. Ethan shifted slightly, not stepping forward, not pulling away, just enough to acknowledge the moment. "You can say no," he said gently to Lily, his voice calm, offering her an out, not claiming the choice, not holding it, just respecting it. Lily shook her head immediately, her grip tightening. "I do not want to say no," she replied, her voice small but firm, and that firmness carried more certainty than anything else in the room. One of the men exhaled sharply, frustration slipping through his composure. "This is absurd," he muttered, but no one supported him. Not now, not anymore, because the room had already moved past him. Victoria's gaze returned to Ethan, searching, questioning, something deeper now. "Why did you not say anything?" she asked, not accusing, just trying to understand. Ethan met her eyes, briefly, then answered simply, "It was not my place," and that answer, quiet and grounded, echoed differently, because in a room full of men who had tried to take the moment, he had been the only one willing to let it belong to someone else. Lily looked between them, then spoke again, her voice softer now, but filled with a clarity that did not need volume. "He does not try to be chosen," she said. "He just is." And in that instant, something invisible but undeniable settled across the room. The kind of silence that does not come from confusion, but from recognition. Victoria stood still, her expression no longer guarded, no longer controlled, but thoughtful, almost vulnerable, as if she was seeing something she had spent years overlooking. And for the first time that night, the question was no longer about who could offer the most, but about who had never needed to offer anything at all. The silence no longer felt fragile. It felt earned, like something the room had not expected to experience but could no longer deny. Victoria stood still, her thoughts no longer moving in straight lines of logic and control, but circling something quieter, something deeper. "Ethan," she said again, and this time there was no authority in it, only curiosity. "Why are you here?" The question lingered, not about the room, not about the job, but about the man himself. Ethan paused, not searching for a better answer, only deciding how honest to be. "Because it is steady," he said, then after a brief moment, "and because my daughter needs me to be." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that could not be polished or improved. One of the men shook his head slightly, unable to accept the shift. "That is not ambition," he said quietly, almost to himself, but Ethan heard him, and he did not argue, he only replied, "It is responsibility." And that difference, small in sound but vast in meaning, settled across the room like a line no one had drawn before. Lily looked up at her mother again, her voice softer now, but more certain than ever. "He does not leave," she said. And that was not a guess, not a hope, but something she had already decided. Victoria's eyes flickered at that, something in her expression tightening just for a second, because that word, leave, carried more history than anyone else in the room could understand. She turned slightly away, just enough to hide it, then back again, regaining composure. "You are asking me," she said slowly, her voice measured but no longer cold, "to trust a man I do not know." Ethan did not step forward, did not try to fill that gap. He only answered, "No." A pause followed, quiet but intentional. "I am not asking for anything." And that answer landed differently than any before it, because it removed the pressure, the negotiation, the expectation, leaving only choice, pure and unforced. Lily squeezed his hand again, her voice barely above a whisper now, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "That is why I chose him." And that was it. No long explanation, no dramatic gesture, just truth spoken without fear. The 5 men stood still, their confidence now fully replaced by something quieter, something closer to realization, because for the first time, they were not competing against each other. They were standing in contrast to something they could not imitate. Victoria looked at Ethan one more time. Really looked, not at his clothes, not at his position, but at the way he stood, grounded, unshaken, present without needing to prove it. And in that moment, something inside her shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to make her question everything she had believed about what made a man worthy. And the room, once filled with voices trying to be chosen, now held a silence that only one man had never tried to break. No one asked for the cameras to stop, but no one remembered they were there anymore, because something far more important had taken over the room, something that could not be edited or rehearsed. Victoria stood quietly, her eyes still on Ethan, but her thoughts moving somewhere deeper, somewhere personal. "What happened to your daughter's mother?" she asked softly, the question careful, not invasive, but real. Ethan did not react immediately, not out of discomfort, but out of respect for the weight of the answer. "She passed." He said simply, no detail, no dramatics, just truth. And that truth shifted the room again, not with shock, but with a quiet understanding. Lily's fingers tightened slightly around his hand, her eyes softening, as if she recognized something familiar in that kind of loss. Victoria's expression changed, just enough to reveal something she had kept hidden behind years of control. She nodded slowly, not as a gesture of agreement, but of recognition. "I see," she said, and for the first time, her voice carried something warmer, something closer to human than executive. One of the men shifted again, uncomfortable now in a way he could not mask. "This is becoming emotional," he said under his breath. But his words no longer carried authority. They sounded distant, disconnected from what was unfolding, because this was no longer about structure or status. It was about presence. Victoria exhaled slowly, her gaze lowering for a brief moment before lifting again. Clearer now, steadier in a different way. "You have been raising her alone," she said, not as a question, but as a realization. Ethan nodded once. "Yes." Another pause followed, not awkward, not forced, just quiet, the kind of quiet that allows truth to settle. Lily spoke again, her voice gentle, almost like she was filling in the spaces adults sometimes leave unfinished. "He knows how to stay," she said, and that word, stay, echoed differently this time. Deeper, more personal. Victoria's eyes flickered at it, something unspoken passing through her expression, because she understood what it meant, not as a concept, but as something she had lived, something she had lost. The room remained still, no one interrupting, no one stepping forward, because they all felt it now. The difference between being present and being available, between offering and remaining. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, not stepping away, not stepping closer, just grounding himself in the moment. And when Victoria finally spoke again, her voice was no longer testing, no longer measuring. It was quiet, almost reflective. "I built everything to protect her," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. And somehow, a small pause. I forgot what she actually needed. The words lingered, soft but undeniable. Lily looked up at her mother, then back at Ethan, her hand still holding his, not tightly now, but naturally, as if it had always belonged there. And in that quiet, undeniable space, the truth no longer needed to be proven, it only needed to be seen. Victoria did not speak right away, and this time, the silence was not uncertain. It was intentional, like a choice forming quietly beneath the surface. She looked at Lily first, really looked, not as a responsibility to manage, not as a future to design, but as a child asking to be understood, and Lily did not look away, her small hand still resting in Ethan's, not gripping now, just connected, natural. As if the decision had already settled somewhere deeper than words, the 5 men stood. Motionless, their presence now reduced to background, their polished certainty replaced by a quiet awareness that they had never truly been part of this moment. Victoria exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her shoulders in a way that no one in that room had ever seen before. All my life, she began, her voice steady but softer. I believe providing more meant loving better. She paused. Not for effect, but because the truth required space. I built everything around that idea. Her eyes flickered briefly across the room, the chandeliers, the cameras, the wealth that once defined her decisions, then back to Lily. But I never asked what you actually needed. The words landed gently, but they carried weight, the kind that shifts something permanent. Lily took a small step forward, still holding Ethan's hand, her voice quiet, but filled with a certainty that did not need to grow louder. I just need someone who stays. And that was it. No complexity, no negotiation, just truth. Ethan lowered his gaze slightly, not to withdraw, but to respect the moment that was not his to claim, and Victoria turned to him one last time, her expression no longer guarded, no longer measuring, but clear, almost peaceful. You did not try to be chosen, she said, and Ethan shook his head gently. That was never my place, he replied, and for the first time, that answer did not sound like distance. It sounded like integrity. Victoria nodded slowly, as if something inside her had finally aligned. Then she stepped closer, not with authority, but with intention. It is now, she said, quietly, and in that moment, the room shifted one final time, not with noise, not with reaction, but with understanding. The cameras were still there, the audience still watching, but no one moved, no one spoke, because something greater than approval had taken hold, something simple, something undeniable. Lily smiled softly, not because she had won, but because she had been heard. Ethan stood steady, unchanged, as he had been from the beginning, and the 5 men, for the first time that night, lowered their eyes, not in defeat, but in recognition, because what had just happened could not be bought, could not be performed, could not be replaced. And as the silence settled across the room like a quiet truth finally understood, it became clear to everyone watching that dignity does not announce itself, it waits, and when it is finally seen, the world does not argue, it simply goes still.